was cover kind of the first portion that we were wanting to look at of our revisions and all of that of the comprehensive land use plan. And so we had decided that we wanted to touch on industrial first, as well as open spaces as a recurring theme, because we perceive that as being something that is necessary, not just in residential and commercial, but also just throughout the city as a whole. We brought in the cheat sheets because we know that industrial is one of those sort of areas, and I guess it could be argued residential and commercial are much the same, where it's sometimes difficult to really define what is industrial, what isn't industrial, and so this way we could kind of pick things apart and see what sort of things everyone sees as being industrial versus maybe what actually is, and kind of how to bring all of that together moving forward as we sculpt the comprehensive land use plan. So if anybody has thoughts, questions, comments, concerns, and so on, please feel free to jump in, and I'm going to try and take as many notes as possible throughout, so I'll probably just defer to Austin and Patsy as much as possible. That way I can continue writing and making sure we're taking as much with us as possible. Okay, there we go. So just tonight's agenda, going through introductory remarks, which we've already knocked out, comprehensive land use plan discussion regarding industrial districts and open space, and then just some closing comments as usual. So I'm referring to what I said earlier, industrial is what we want to touch on first, but then we're going in more the direction of commercial, then to mixed use, and then residential as we make our way through things over the next several months. I've got these maps available. I can open these up if we need them. Sometimes this computer doesn't quite have the juice to have everything going at once, so if we need it, I'll get them open. We've got what the comprehensive land use plan is, in case we need that. But now we're going to kind of jump into what it is that we had in mind. Patsy, I believe the first batch is from you.
I mean, I don't know that there's a lot of changes. You know, we added some areas that the Public Facilities Board purchased up off of 265 as industrial areas. We've inherited some from the Bethel Heights area, those that we need to add into it. One of the things that I struggle with is that architectural unity and conformity of industrial areas with commercial uses, because we don't have industrial design standards. So we can kind of work with the developer and talk about, you know, maybe their office portion of it needs to look differently, and, you know, that may be something that we need, and I'll back up and say, we need attractive industrial areas just like we have attractive commercial areas too. So that to me, that's a weakness that we still have. And you've heard me say before, it's just as important that we protect the industrial areas from uses that aren't compatible to go into them as it is the other way around. And some of you were here and some of you weren't. We had an auction house that wanted to go into the industrial area over there. That kind of activity is a totally different than what you see in a normal industrial area. So I think it's important that we remember that. The blending over that we have now, like of trades and services going into industrial area, really creates a different kind of atmosphere in an industrial area that we didn't. I don't know that that's what we had in mind. You know, now that's what Rick made the comment. Industrial is kind of an odd or a different kind of discussion. You know, warehousing is totally different than industrial too. We do have a separate warehousing zone. But do we have too much blend over in the industrial districts, and is that something we really need to look at? Or are there areas that need to be that kind of blended commercial areas too? Like a limited manufacturing and a heavy commercial, because we used to have the I2 zone, I1 was heavy commercial, limited industrial. Is that something we need to go back to, and that addresses some of those other things? The ones that come to mind is like granite places that have that kind of storage of those kind of things. To me, that's one of the ones that we've had a problem with in the past. So that's kind of where I'm going with some of those.
You know, one of the things that I hear a lot that people are looking for right now is they want a lot of flex space. So they really want maybe a small office in the front, and they need warehouse slash manufacturing slash commercial in the back of it. And that's where I do think that there's a lot of bleed over from commercial uses to in the industrial areas that we would, call out. I also think that, I agree with you, because I was looking at the goals of the industrial land use, and I don't think any of them need changed, but I don't think we do a good job of enforcing these goals, because, I think the issue that I've seen is that it's extremely difficult, if not impossible, to rezone anything into an industrial use. You get a lot of pushback from residents, warranted, unwarranted. I'm not to say what's right or what's wrong. I'm just saying rezoning something to industrial is damn near impossible to do. And so I do think we need to do a better job about allocating more space in the land use plan for those types of uses, so that we know, it's in the plan.
Well, and the land use goals there indicate, we want areas that have rail service, and we want that have major arterial service, and those kind of things are really important to an industrial area. So that's some of the things we have to talk about.
One of the things, when I think about industrial, I think about very odorous, lots of traffic incoming and, coming and going for shipping and receiving and stuff like that. And maybe some noise, maybe a significant amount of noise. But those are, I just feel like I live next to the Pappas plant and Tyson Berry Street plant, and it's pretty obvious that those are industrial facilities.
Those meet the...
Yeah, and I think some of where we've gotten into people wanting industrial for warehouse is not what I would call an industrial use. And so I think that hurts them, and that obviously I think affects our ability to, allocate land for that.
Well, the struggle they have too is that what's always been that way in those areas, and so why do I have to change? I think that's the biggest challenge we run into a lot of times when you do have, we're getting to a point that in the industrial areas there's healthy turnover happening in some of those spaces there. And we just have to be consistent on how we address some of those things. But then I have this question: what responsibility does the chamber have in some of these areas, in helping promote some of these areas?
Well, as the economic development body for the city, and they work with the Public Facilities Board, who owns all those industrial areas, I think they have a very major role in how we handle industrial, because they're the ones that's out recruiting and working with those industries who want to come in and expand.
I struggle with, that's not something we can take on as far as the marketing of those things and so forth on it. I don't think that I see a lot of change needed in the use units either, in the whole piece. I just think that you guys did a good job as far as visual representation of, the expansion of form-based code areas in there, where it's optional, but gives people a good understanding of how you can have fill-in and those types of things. I think we have an opportunity to help create some visuals of what are the different types of industrial use. Because on my page, a lot of times you get the perception that it's just lets off an odor and those types of things, but in reality there are other use units that it's assembly and those types of things. But I don't think there's a good understanding sometimes as far as what goes in an industrial space there.
The
It would
general
help us
industrial
for-
district, really sets it as something that has potential objectionable uses and hazards and a lot of traffic. So I think the I-2 is not a problem. It's when you get into this light industrial where we allow trades and services, automotive services,
Yeah.
warehousing and wholesale, limited manufacturing, parking. I mean, it's the trades and services and automotive services to me that create the concern with
But
what
those are
what
not
it's
going
like.
in, those typically aren't going into a true industrial zone.
Well, but they are.
Yeah.
We have a lot of the area that the Public Facilities Board owns is zone I-1, not I-2. So the area around NTI, that area around Turnbow Park, that's all I-1. That's
I
where you get
understand
that
but that's
blend.
not where I'm seeing automotive services.
Well,
Well,
there's.
like, I'm thinking of Ace of Blades, in that was a, Public Facilities Board owned on the new Dick Trammell, is that?
Actually and truly, they bought that corner before.
Oh, they did?
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
While it was in Bethel Heights, that was a
While it
big
was in Bethel
controversy
Heights.
over
But
that.
that's I think that's an example of maybe an area that would be zoned for industrial, where you have a landscaping business going in.
Right.
And that's not really
Yeah.
what you want to see there. Yeah.
Okay, so and I'll go back, the ones I use is the granite places, because that, comes to mind a lot. They're cutting it, which is limited manufacturing, but they're storing it outside. But really, it's a sales place.
Yeah, and I think a lot of those gravitate towards those industrial zonings because they think they can avoid commercial design standards, which is
That's-
obvious, particularly in
Uh-huh.
use unit
Uh-huh.
21, trading services, which
Uh-huh.
allows everything from material storage to contractor's office, yard, I mean, all those things are allowed. So, I mean, maybe it's something that we need to consider changing whether that's allowed in an I-1. I mean, maybe that's the solution.
I think customers are a good, you have customers coming there,
Yeah.
that's kind of for me,
The difference between the two.
between the two. I mean, you don't have customers going to a true industrial plant,
True.
you know?
That might be a definition that we have to look like that.
Yeah, maybe that could be.
You know, warehouse, W1, I can think of numerous instances where we've actually tried to promote that, push that, okay, well, if your legitimate is doing warehousing, then let's go with W1, but that's never the case because it's not as marketable and it doesn't have the flexibility that you get with an I-1. So they ultimately always gravitate towards, no, I want to stick to either an I-1 or they'll, move down to a commercial zoning because it just has more flexibility.
Well, and I can tell you that, again, like what I was saying, most businesses are wanting flex space. So maybe warehouse, but maybe I build some stuff in there, and maybe I have a showroom too, but it's very hard. I mean, like anymore, it's just very hard. You have to be a very big business to want just a warehouse, and that's it,
Well, it goes back to, we've kind of taken the position sometimes that if it is a commercial use in the industrial zone, at like a use unit 21, it has to meet commercial design
Right.
standards.
I mean, that's how we treat it.
But that's kind of what we've been doing. If somebody really wanted to test that, I don't know that we could defend it all the way through. I'll defend it as long as I can, but it's truly not an industrial use. It's more of a commercial use. You can't get around doing commercial design standards just because you picked an I-1, if it truly is a commercial use.
And it's usually pretty easy to make that argument.
Yeah.
I mean, there's been a few cases where it was a little gray area, I guess. If they really wanted to push it out,
Yeah.
we'd really be able to follow
Yeah.
through on that.
That's our struggle with the industrial uses and those kind of things.
I'd love to see some presentation as far as what these different entities and the chamber on what their promotions look like for these.
We'll see
I
what
think
we
it's
do.
important.
How is the city's industrial areas being portrayed to the
Yeah.
development
Yeah,
community is
that's
what's
interesting.
available?
And-
We gotta ask the right questions so that we get the kind of presentation that we need.
I'd also be curious to understand that it's not only just the industrial areas, but also the warehousing spaces.
Yeah.
Part of this is to understand how informed are they with how things are dramatically changing in the role of a warehousing space role of warehousing spaces is changing because of the proximity of how fast can I get it delivered to from point A to point B. So there's a lot of smaller warehousing locations that are being requested to be able to do that one-day delivery and those types of things.
And I think we're gonna see more and more of that.
But we have no plan for that.
True.
And that's a problem because, you know, if I was coming in here, that's one of the big things I'd love to see if I was in that type of business. Because to your point, you do have a large investor that's willing to offer up the warehousing space, but lease it out to 10 tenants. That gives them that flexibility in how they manage certain things. They can package there and ship it out, so.
That tells me that even more than the rail, you know, having a rail spur, I wanna be close to 49. You know, close to a exit on 49.
But is the cost of the land you're gonna see along 49 something that's gonna keep those people from going there?
Nope, I don't think so, not at all.
See, we were looking at that as being a general area where the industrial community or the industrial land uses would be concentrated a lot. You're saying we need to look at something different.
I would.
Say that again? Look at something, what do you mean?
Locations being different. We were looking at the goal of being along major highways, the rail service, that kind of stuff. Because, you know, we have good east-west access that allows you don't have to go right on 49 to get there.
Yeah.
Where we can still concentrate them in that area where it's already there without opening up 49 for industrial activity.
Yeah.
And yeah.
I'm sorry, catching up, what's the exact problem or topic of discussion?
Industrial uses in the land use plan, the goals and policies of the industrial portion of the plan.
Maybe more warehouse maybe not industrial, but I know that, I know we were talking about warehouse, but maybe more warehouse.
To make a distinction.
Out towards the highway, and then, you know.
Quick side question, and this may be a little bit to the chamber part, but do we have, I don't know if an entity, if the city government has this information or the chamber, but what is if you were to put growth rates on all these zones, what has been like the 3-year growth? I mean, I imagine it's a lot.
That'd be good.
Like, so what's being demanded? Do we see demand for industrial?
We usually go to the university and with, you know, Mervin and his group, because they track a lot of that stuff. You know, when he made his presentation, he said a little bit about that, but we didn't get into a lot of that detail. Maybe we need to delve into that a little bit more with.
I think you're gonna see a hidden one related to warehousing.
Okay, so we gotta figure out how to translate this into words, and how do we translate this into a visual representation of that.
I'm even just curious, even along like what's been requested, like what zoning, if we, put all of our data together last 2 years, like what was in the percentage of the most requested zones, how many, across the board, and then maybe compare that to like what you're saying.
Yeah, that'd be relatively easy.
Yeah, that would be easy. Well, I can probably tell you the industrial requests that we've had have been very limited in the last 3 or 4 years.
Did you say industrial request?
Yes, because, the industrial commission or the public facilities board bought a big piece of property and that was rezoned. I don't know of hardly any more that's been requested. Now, we got those into Bethel Heights that we just recently got. That's an area that's changed some, but we can go back and look at that, see.
Because outside of the guy who came a couple cycles ago and wanted to move his business back here, I would imagine industry might be stabilized and you're seeing a lot of commercial fall back, residential.
One of the things you hear about big industry looking at this area is the lack of workforce. Because that's the question that everybody's dealing with. Can we provide the workforce that's needed for industrial development? And it always comes up with the question is how do you compete with the poultry industry for workforce too? Yeah. But we're looking at a different type of industry coming to Northwest Arkansas, I think, too.
Mm-hmm.
We have great water supply.
Mm-hmm.
That's something that not every area has. I don't know.
What type of industry
you think we're trying to attract, or you think that it's looking at to bring down, or Northwest Arkansas in general?
To be quite honest, I can't tell you, because we haven't had a lot of conversations with the chamber about what are the inquiries and what are people looking for, unless it's a really big one, and then we kind of talk about that a little bit.
Yeah.
Not a lot.
I definitely think it'd be interesting to see, even in big bucket, industrial, commercial, residential, what is our forecasted rate? I mean, because we might find that, we might be looking at a situation where we might have to de-scope industrial,
Yeah.
as you just poultry companies that just in general are having a hard time getting people across the board, specific to poultry.
The larger ones, like poultry processing, those are gonna define themselves pretty easily. And that's not so much of my concern. My concern is more of what we were talking about at the beginning, is those trades and services. I think it's a growing trend, that we don't have well defined as a city or a chamber and those types of things. And so, is that an industrial, or is that commercial, or is it its own? I don't know.
That's back to the question when we started with, it really doesn't fit as an industrial use, but it kind of is.
It's like it needs to its own distinction, of flex warehouse or something that really does address that and acknowledges that there are, some environmental impact, like you said, Bay. There is high traffic, there's the noise aspect, but they're not hard environmental impacts like we would normally associate with heavy industrial.
When I look at, I actually like what's happening on Wagon Wheel in defined areas. That's the home building space. I do like that one business, although I don't like the building that we approved. But that is some of the right things to go in that area. It's becoming a very branded area.
Well, I think it started like with Rexel going in there, bringing all of their electrical supplies for the region at that location. Kimball Electric's on the other side of 49 at that location. You're right, those kind of things are coming to that area. I did talk to developers looking at building some of those big warehouses that'll bring some of that kind of stuff, like where the next to Metro in Lowell, one of those kind of flex spaces like we're Floyd America, that kind of stuff, looking at that area of Wagon Wheel. The biggest holdup we have for Wagon Wheel is the interchange itself. It's going to have something done to it, despite what the highway department thinks.
What do you guys online think? Do you have any input?
Yeah, we've got good points on both sides. I don't know at some point whether we need to just simply include another definition to kind of separate the two, but there are times where it just doesn't fit in either one. And I know we need to be a little more descriptive for some of these folks, because I agree, I don't think we have what I would consider an industrial park area close to the highway right now, close to the off-ramps. Like I would normally think of an industrial park, right? So if all of a sudden, I'm making this up, I know they wouldn't, but if all of a sudden UPS downtown, down on the south side said, we want to relocate out on the highway, do you have a place for us to relocate to so we can be near the interchange? Nothing pops to mind, right? So I don't know that that's something we need to look for, but I just think the day will come where we will wish we had set some property aside for that, even if it's down the road from the interchange, but at least off the interchange, if that makes sense.
That's in line with what you're saying, right?
Yeah.
Especially for warehousing.
Because we know what happens is, we've seen that residential typically encroaches on those uses. So then they say, oh, well, there's residential here, you can't add any more industrial, but maybe the question was, should the residential have gotten this close to the industrial in the first place? So if we don't do that, I think you're gonna see residential creep into areas that if we don't set aside, they're going to end up there, and then it will be impossible to
Look
do
at the
it.
pushback we got on the 91 acres that was right off 41, I'm sorry, off 49. And we heard from all kinds of residents about proximity.
Yeah, and that was
warehousing.
Yeah.
But they were concerned not so much about the dirt, the noise that you were talking about, but they were focused on truck traffic. And so that's another issue.
Yeah.
Why that needs to be out near 49.
Yeah.
Is Turnbow currently the only designated industrial park that was designed, that subdivision was designed as an industrial subdivision.
Well, except the new property that the public facilities
So
board
are they gonna
bought.
designate that as a industrial park?
Assume so.
Yeah.
And then there's the technology park, which is over there around the incubation center and all that area was identified as the technology park.
But what does that mean?
Well, Nanomec went
Yeah,
over there, and,
Nanomec.
yeah, I know, but that, I'm telling you the ones I do know. You know, the area along
You've got the
40th Street.
Whitlock
Whitlock and.
Labs over there,
Uh-huh.
Whitback Labs.
Whitback, yeah.
Mhm.
The area along 40th Street, where Clayton and all those areas, that's kind of another one of those trades and services
Yeah.
type area that has been developing over the years with some warehouses that goes into that space. And it's on the land use plan as light industrial area. Because that's kind of what's happened with it. You go look at it over there, that's basically what you
Yeah,
see,
yeah.
those kind of things, with maybe heavier commercial right along 412.
I mean, over there, you've got anything from, you know, automotive, welding, and Onyx coffee roasters over there.
Yeah.
I mean, you get,
Mhm.
you know, everything.
And the question is, Onyx Coffee Roaster, is that an industrial use, or is that a commercial use? Because unless you don't like the smell of coffee, or, you know, and the bakery for Stone Mills over there too, you know. Those are considered to be
I
light
think when I think
industrial.
of commercial use, what I would think of commercial use, not once again, I'm is UPS and FedEx and 18-wheelers, right, they're one up and down. I don't know along some of those routes we just talked about, that they would be accepting of 18-wheelers all of a sudden showing up and
Yeah.
going up and down the road on 48 or 412, maybe on 412, obviously there's truck traffic there. I just think that, like, when I think of the coffee place, I think that's more commercial than I do coffee, or more commercial than I do industrial.
What about the cookie factory? Because we let that go in there off of 40th Street, and they bake cookies, flash freeze them to ship out to bakeries all over the area. It has big trucks in and out, and it's off of 40th Street.
But
Went
some
in
of
as a
those-
light industrial.
Some of it is already.
And again, I think the one spot, like, Will's using that baking, I think is a great example of probably what you would consider commercial or either industrial, because they do have 18-wheelers. I guess what I'm thinking, and I'm not trying to argue with anybody, I'm just thinking, if you built another 10 uses just like that down that street, would the citizens who live around here be accepting of that being full of 18-wheelers going back and forth?
I mean, I think you have to have some type of buffer zones around these areas so that you can, but I mean, I think in order to kind of establish that, you have to have an idea of what, I don't want to say zones, I'm going to use a different word, but what type of businesses and type of structures are going to be demanded, and then, to your point, do we write specific zones that kind of fit that, and maybe it's much like the form-based codes, do we have to evolve to a point to where you're asking different sets of questions when you determine zoning, like, not only what types of things you're gonna do, how many employees do you have, how do you ship product?
That's what I was thinking of, because you have a big difference between, like, okay, Core, they need to take kegs in the local area, so they're not using 18-wheelers.
Right.
Versus somebody, so I think, like, define the type of transportation that comes in and out of there, the type of shipping would be a big deal.
Yeah, I agree.
Other than vans and stuff that are gonna run out, or box trucks or whatever,
Vans and
versus
box
an
trucks.
18-wheeler.
It'll be the 18-wheelers that will draw the opposition from everybody.
Yeah, totally, yeah.
So what you're saying, if we put in vans and smaller vehicles, whatever that be industrial or commercial, that's a good idea.
Yeah, like,
That would work.
like, Pascal Heat and Air, right, they have all those,
Yep.
but they're not using 18-wheelers, but they've got a,
Bigger
a
van.
van that's set up and branded and everything.
And, I mean, ideally, you're going from like heavy industry to light industry, so that, and then maybe some type of warehousing / commercial, so that like, there's enough of appropriate buffer.
Well, that's where Dixieland's gonna really do well, is that you have that commercial, then warehouse, in that one piece, so it's a good buffer in that perspective.
I guess touching on that, the long-term regulation of that, a business begins in this space.
Sure.
And they start with box trucks, well, they're doing pretty good, they expand.
Mhm.
At what point, and this is just things that we would have to think about, to
Yeah.
actually put that in the code, I don't know, it's one of those things that it sounds very good, but putting that on paper and
Yeah.
making it effective,
could be hard.
It can be
The-
very
the-
hard to police something like that.
Some of these areas that the 18-wheeler is of concern, I'll take my brother-in-law's business as far as that, he put that right in Tawny Town, just outside of our zoning.
Yeah.
It is the worst location for an 18-wheeler to have to get in and out of.
Yeah.
In that whole piece.
And that, and
He
traversing
couldn't get
that.
access to that, development right next to it to go to the lights. And I told him, I said, you didn't get that because he needs to make improvements to his parking lot, and that's why he didn't want to grant you access to it, in that whole piece.
But traversing that whole area
Yeah,
is
but
just.
my point on that is that those are some big things to look at in some of these areas, is that, accessibility there.
But his is strictly a warehouse business.
And it is. I still keep bringing up warehouses because I think it's a big growth opportunity.
Yeah.
An area that I think we need to look at more on this is probably the northeast portion of the city. Where the bypass is gonna be coming through in that whole space, and what are the access points in some of those locations?
Right now, the highway department's plans does not show any interchanges on 412 once you get past 265 till you get to 412.
But is that
That's
just
gonna
because?
have to happen.
But is that just because right now it's just all open space?
Yes, and that's where it is.
But
Our master street plan shows an access every mile, which is the closest that you can put them, so that we open that up somewhere through there. It can't be like it is.
Yeah, and so I'd almost say both on the northeast and northwest side. I don't know that I totally agree everything just needs to be on the I-49 buffer. I mean, if you have good accesses to that on there.
I agree.
There is some tremendous opportunities, on both the northwest and northeast corridors.
What are these pink circles up here in the northeast, up in the northeast?
Those are
section?
the locations on the master plan that shows where there needs to be an interchange.
Oh, okay. Well, you almost said quarry, and I was thinking,
Yeah.
where
No,
you've
the blue
already
is the-
got.
The blue is the quarry that's already there. That's
Okay,
what
so
we're
where
talking
you've
about.
already got a heavy industrial use might be an area that you just go ahead and say, maybe we wanna just target this area because it's already here.
I feel that given how far out that is, I don't know that it's, personally, I don't feel that it's reasonable to try and scope that out right now, because then anybody can do it.
Agree, and not right now.
That's one of the things that we
It's
have to be
outside
very
our
careful
planning.
about, and I think that's why it's important that that area outlined in blue that is already roughly, industrial already is where we want to at first hyper focus on, because we have to keep in mind it's already industrial.
Yeah.
And so if they want to be
But
industrial.
is that an area that
so
we have a lot that's coming to us?
I'm sorry.
Is that an area that we have a lot of things that are coming to us?
From an industrial perspective, I mean, I think that kind of goes back around what I was mentioning about the park. I mean, it may be oversimplifying, but I love just having the industrial park. Somewhere in our trip, I asked one of the planners, I said, how's your industrial doing? They said, our industrial park is doing great. And you're like, that's a fantastic answer. Our industrial park
Yeah.
is doing great.
Yeah.
But do they, many cities call their industrial park, it's warehousing space.
Could be.
Well, I think maybe with this, we're speaking specifically to I-1, I-2.
Okay.
But I mean, I think that would make it more marketable. I mean, it's certainly, if you are coming in with legitimate industrial use that is already designated, and there's no question of if there's gonna be a contentious rezone there, because, it's clearly it's purpose built for that. And it also makes it easier for us to buffer and not have to come back retroactively to create that buffer when those, I mean,
What's the business that went out, that had the big, building on the north side of, 265?
Well, the steelyard that's going, you mean the new ones that we just approved?
No, this is an existing building that the company left and vacated that building. It was just north of the baking,
Or
facility.
Newlywed, just north of Newlywed Figs,
Yeah.
where Dan Herb used to be,
Yeah. So all of that is becoming warehousing space now.
Yeah, it is.
There's like 5 different businesses, I think, in there now.
Mhm.
But that's industrial, right?
It's industrial, it's already the industrial area.
But that whole building's being used for warehouse.
Yeah.
So let me ask you, on the enforcement question really quick. A policy, though, a policy or a goal for industrial, this type of industrial to have typically this type, we could do that. Now, maybe not enforce it, but as a voting type guidance on the goals of the land use plan, we could certainly incorporate that, right?
Yeah. But I guess what I'm hearing is the goals that we have are really not that far out. We need to add a few policies that we address the aesthetics of it, and you can't skirt commercial design standards to go into industrial areas, those kind of things that we're dealing with, those kind of policy decisions that we need to talk about. Did you have any others, Rick, that we talked about?
Well, I mean, I had a little bit that I had thrown in there.
What's the design standard for W in their warehouse?
There isn't any.
There isn't any for that.
There isn't any for that because it's an industrial use.
So a takeaway would be to make design standards for that and to have, I guess, like a approach to how we prevent entities from skirting commercial design use by going into industrial. So how do you catch that?
I would go heavy in that case. Your design standards would just be, I think, a lot more heavy on screening, you know, landscaping, noise suppression, that kind of thing, and less about the, you know,
I mean,
100-foot without a break in the, you know.
Because that's not gonna fly well.
That's what you want. You want good access, you want good screening, and, all that.
That doesn't mean the office in the front of it can't meet some of that other standard and create nice-looking office, but that manufacturing, the warehouse portion of that's gonna be a big building, because that's what they're looking for in warehouse or manufacturing stuff,
So, in order to avoid some conflict, we have got to get some, those that have extensive experience in these areas, we have to get some feedback from them as far as,
Okay, we'll put that on the list of, now,
because this is totally gonna get perceived wrong if we don't do that.
I know, give us a little bit of time to think about that. I'm not sure the chamber's gonna be much help.
The comment about the industrial parks and the person who said our industrial park is really low.
Yeah.
Any tax abatement issues that they offered up to make that successful?
That was just a surface level comment, and they just happened to just say, well, man, it's been ringing my head ever since.
Okay.
But no, we didn't get into the weeds on any of that. But luckily we have this, contact, so we could reach out and see if they had any.
I was just curious if part of the reason for the success might be a low tax abatement issue. If they move in and after 20 years, then everything comes clear.
Of course, state law and article doesn't allow you to do those kind of things near as easily as it does in other places.
Yeah.
We have that problem.
Good.
I think this is in Missouri.
I think it's in Springfield.
Yeah.
Okay.
Of course, I mean, they have kind of a rich history of.
We'll go back and brainstorm some more, get some things on paper, see if we can get with the chamber and see if they can come back and talk to us, or even if they don't do it in a presentation, can they give us some of the documentation they're using as recruiting material? To have a chance to look at some of that. I don't know what we're gonna see, what we're gonna have. We'll see how all that goes. Okay.
Well, they need the help. They need to take some initiative on here, because
I'm
here's
not
the
arguing
thing.
with you, yeah.
I know, I'm just stating the obvious in that, but,
Yeah.
you know, my full time being on the planning commission, not one time have I seen a W-1 come through. The only time this once came through, because that was a suggestion of the city council recently,
Well,
to change that.
You'll see that one on, Wagonville that came in as a W-1, they didn't wanna be tied down to just a dedicated warehouse, that's why they came in with C5. And that was after discussions with the property owner directly saying, you're really gonna tie yourself down to a dedicated warehouse?
Everyone is nothing but a warehouse until they make the realization that they cannot do anything else but warehouse.
So maybe is that where we're leaning right now, is maybe shifting some of that light industrial into a warehouse type?
Maybe expanding it a little bit more, or maybe not call it a warehouse district.
But giving some additional flexibility.
What you're stating,
Yeah.
but what you're stating is incorrect. I mean, it does allow limited manufacturing.
As a conditional use in a warehouse in the W1 zone.
Well, why not drop it to conditional use?
Well, and that may be something that
Those
we
are
need
things
to
that we
do.
look at.
Yeah.
Yeah.
When we put the W1 in place, we were having people that wanted to do just dedicated warehouses. And that's kind of how that got, because we had a controversy over, they had to meet design standards if they, and
That,
we'll get into some of
all I'm
that.
trying to point out is that the whole time being on the planning commission, I haven't seen any of the W1, and I've seen very few of the, industrial.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's a red flag in itself,
Yeah.
overall.
Allowing.
We're not promoting these, something's not right to promote these appropriately in there.
I agree. We've had that discussion before.
And that's a bit of a branding issue,
Mhm.
but that's not our responsibility to have to manage that. And, you know, as we speak to the chamber or whoever it is, that's quite honestly some criticism that they need to hear and action upon that. Because if they don't, and we don't operate as bodies that work together, this is not gonna be successful.
And so, to that point, you said the last time the chamber has been here is never, is that what you're saying?
No, I was bringing up the last time that a W1 came through was recently with, that 91 acres. What was recommended in the city council, which they overrode us, that went to W1.
Mhm.
And that wasn't, we didn't even talk about that as far as that whole option, just because.
That's
I mean,
okay.
The city council's also your last chance, right?
Sure, yeah.
So.
Okay.
Sorry we belabored this,
Well,
but I mean,
and the only other issue that we really didn't talk about is the idea of increasing the amount of open space in the industrial area too. How does that tie into it? And do we need more open spaces in those areas too? That's not something we've talked about very much, because, you know, in some of the others.
If it helps as a buffer to the neighborhoods, as James brought up, that's not a bad idea either.
Okay, let's talk about open space as a function of a land use goal, okay?
I also think, just as you, I mean, you can't be all things to everybody, so it's
No.
almost like what, you know, there's on, you know, what, generally speaking, direction are we kind of going, I guess, might be slightly off course,
You guys want to talk about that for just a few minutes?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's certainly, and something that we have not incorporated as part of the land use plan in the past is, I think we're at a critical point to do that now, given the, you know, rate of growth in the city. I mean, this is certainly the time to set goals for green space preservation if we're ever going to do it. So I would like to, you know, incorporate this as part of the comprehensive land use plan. Obviously, you know, we have some areas that are unnatural to be included with that, floodway, things like that. But it's also kind of a touchy subject, because obviously we can't just put a swath of green across someone's property and say, well, we'd like to preserve this for green space. Well, unfortunately, we don't own it. So, you know, it's kind of a.
Can be considered a taking issue if you mark it on the
Right,
land use map
right.
that you want to preserve.
Oh, sure.
Take
It
it.
ruins their resale value, I mean, first of all.
I mean, I do agree if you don't, I like the economic value of it, but, and I agree if you don't quote unquote budget for it now, it'll all be gone. I guess the question is, how do you reasonably implement something like this? I mean, does it go to open space requirements within a zone? Like there's so much of
Well,
it.
you know, like we do in a PUD, you have to have 12% or 15% open space.
Mhm.
You know, is there some other areas that we need to incorporate that you gotta have a certain percentage of open space? It can't be all buildings and stuff.
So that is not a requirement for a large-scale development, a large-scale commercial development doesn't have a green space requirement?
No, that's not necessarily true. There are certain green
There
space
are, but it's
requirements for parking
perimeterly,
lots and things like
yeah.
that.
Well-
Which is how we get, you know, what we do.
I guess the question.
Perimeter landscaping,
Yeah.
foundation landscaping, that kind of thing, but not just green.
Or, I think you're talking about, again, I mean, like, not just green, but we're saying like an actual.
Tree canopy.
Tree
Oh,
canopy.
we're talking about large,
Yeah.
large preservation of green space.
So, the question is, I guess my question is then, from a zoning aspect, how do we best tie that into?
You just incorporate it as part of it, the same way that we would designate commercial as a best ICs for an area, we designate something for preservation. But the, you know, the tricky part is that we can only do that in areas where it's appropriate for us to do it.
Yeah, and I guess that's my,
Yeah, we do, like in multifamily, you have to have open space based on the number of bedrooms you have. Because we determined that was important for residential development, there be enough open space like that. We haven't determined on anything else, if there is an appropriate level of open space.
and we're also able to, I feel like we're able to write in that you have to have so many, not only do we talk about, but foliage, greenage, I'm lacking the right term, but we've talked about there's certain types of plants that have to be,
That can be.
that can be.
Right, right. We have a species list of things that you can use. We don't dictate that you have to use this kind of stuff. You have to do perimeter landscaping, and these are the materials that you can use. Foundation landscaping, parking islands, you know,
Well,
those kind of things.
Is it some type of landscaping / open space, like, requirement written into the zonings that get us? Because I hear what you're saying, like, hey, designate this place as a, which gives you, I think will give some other entities some, in the future, a way to undo that if it, you know.
You know, there are places that if there is a certain percentage of canopy on a lot, you have to make sure that percentage of canopy is either preserved with what's there, or you have to put it back.
Fayetteville is that way, is it not?
Fayetteville goes a little bit to the extreme, I think, in my opinion, but there is something to be said about, if you know, a large portion of that tract has canopy on it, you need to put a percentage of that back.
Right.
Or preserve some of the trees of a certain size.
So, I mean, realistically, what we're talking about is being intentional about defining large swaths of spaces in the city that is just for this. And my question is, what flexibility do we have as far as, especially with commercial development and things like that, that a certain percentage of contribution that they can make to some of these open spaces to preserve those, in return, you don't have to do these things.
There are methods to do that, and we have never had one of those. The problem you get into is the legalities of putting it in a pot that can be used everywhere, or it can only be used in this certain neighborhood, because I don't want to put $100,000 in for open space preservation that's going clear across town, and I never get to see any return on that. Those are the kinds of questions.
Well, this is an opportunity. I mean, I'm always for trails and accessibility. But you also hear me say that I'm not
We'll
all
take the
about...
bike lane dividers down.
Well, I'm also not about sidewalks everywhere that just don't get used in that whole piece. If you do contribute to a green space, are there certain areas that logically make sense that, you know what, we really don't want to create the walkability in certain locations of the city?
I think we need to
Dangerous.
get Ernest in to talk about the legalities of creating some kind of a opportunity that goes into to pay for how the city as a whole uses it.
Yeah, and I see, so then I guess I see 3 potential options emerging. I think, in a very real way, we can write into the zoning parameters ways that, hey, on a commercial zone, you have to have, I'm making all this up, 15% open space, and then a certain amount of shrubs, and these are what we are asking for, and maybe some of that's mature trees, or if you displace trees, you have to recreate it. Secondly, I think, and this is where I agree with you, bring in legal, because while I would love to create like an open space in the master plan that you kind of hold, I don't know legally and from an execution how you actually protect that without the city or someone owning the land.
Right.
But perhaps, maybe there's a way to say you have to contribute, if you're taking away green space, you have to contribute to some fund.
Yeah, you
that
could be able
helps
to
the
create
city.
conservation easements and
Yeah,
or
right.
things like that. How's the legal way that you get
Mhm.
people to participate in that, and then the determination is this is something that's acquired with a conservation easement that can be used.
Right.
I'm good with understanding the legal parameters. I'm also
Yeah.
good with changing the legal parameters and influencing
Well,
some of those.
That's a big topic that needs to be discussed.
I mean, we have an opportunity as a city, and I'm sure our neighboring cities have some of these same goals and aspirations.
Yeah.
It's a pretty collective voice to be able to influence at the
Yeah,
state level.
yeah. I think that's an area we need to look into and get with Ernest, and I know he's got some specific. We're just going through the list of all of the development bonds and payments in lieu of that we've got, and try to figure out, you know, we've got a couple $100,000, we need to use that to just
Right.
let it keep sitting there. So we're,
Yeah.
with Ron being able to have some time, because none of the rest of us has that time, to start delving into that and see what we're gonna have some meetings with Ernest in the next couple of weeks to figure out where we go with some of that kind of stuff. You know, if you put up.
Hey, can I-
Sorry,
I'm
Will,
so
go
sorry,
ahead.
Patsy, I didn't mean to interrupt you. Go ahead, Patsy, I didn't mean to interrupt you.
Go ahead.
I just have a real quick question, and I'm just asking from a citizen standpoint. If I understood, and it is hard to hear, so I apologize if I maybe misunderstood it. If we have 200,000, whatever the number is, in a bank account, and we need to use it for something like that, have we ever considered as a city putting out a citywide challenge or contest for the citizens to say, we have some money in our coffers for use in green space or something similar to that? Please tell us why it should be in your neighborhood, and then let the mayor pick whichever one, or whoever wants to take it, whatever, can pick whichever one they like, and then put the money towards that, just so the citizens feel like they have a little more say sometimes in where some of that goes. Maybe that's a crazy idea, I'm just asking.
I don't think it's a bad idea, but we've got to get to the point where the money that's in there that was deposited for specific uses can be used otherwise. And until we get that legal opinion, and that's what we're working with Ernest, to say, you know, if somebody puts up a bond for a sidewalk and 3 years later they still haven't built it, can we use that money to build sidewalks in that neighborhood somewhere else? And can we come up with a sidewalk plan to start using some of that money? So we're working through that now to be able to go with Ernest with some really direct questions on how can we start doing that kind of thing. We're not there yet.
I think for things like that in this here,
Yeah.
we would get a lot less variances.
Yeah. The goal is, but the goal in the land use plan is to create the capability to provide open space and connectivity on a citywide basis as development occurs. Sometimes that's just in the area where the development's going on. Sometimes that needs to be put into a pot and used someplace else. I think that's where we need to go with this.
I will say that, where there is a lot of development now starting to happen is on the Northwest Corridor piece, and then, this last planning commission, as far as the 2 multifamily, units, I voted yes, we all did in that whole piece, but I did have my reservations about that as well, because you're seeing more and more where they're leveling those areas and actually even filling. And that is impeding on areas, and you have seen the flooding get a lot worse down near the sewer plant and things like that. And there are areas in those proximities that these open spaces are going to have to be addressed.
So I'll go back and tell you, I think we need to do some regional detention studies. So we deal with stormwater on a bigger basis than every little piece of property have its own detention pond. That makes no sense to me at all. We gotta get to that point too, back to that point, because we were there before.
And if we're having these immense issues, really, and I'm not trying to point fingers at engineering, but the rules that they are working with, if the rules that they are working with are not working, then something needs to be done to make organize in whatever way and prove that this is, or that is the way that they need to be altered.
If residents continue to come in and say, since they put that in, we have a flooding problem.
Yes.
Where was the study that said there would be no impact on the residents? Because that's not happening, right?
And again, it's not to say that engineering isn't doing their job. They may just be following rules that are not sufficient for what it is that we are dealing with.
And what you said was saying is that any of these type of where we want to implement more of this, small developers carry a bigger portion of that burden, because if you just do a small little property and now you got to figure out detention, you've got to go out and hire somebody to mark trees with ribbons and do all this, so how can we
back to the regional detention idea, it helps everybody in the long run. We've got to get back to that.
And encourages development.
Low-hanging fruit real quick. We have a arborist, correct, on staff now, city staff? Has she reviewed the species list and
Well, I know that
provided
Steve
feedback?
has, and we made some changes based on what
I
Steve
sat
said.
down
and-
with Steve
Yeah.
at one point, and we did make a few
He's the landscape
changes.
architect,
Yeah.
too. We did that before.
Gotcha.
Yeah, but that's something that needs to be looked at on a regular basis.
Because I've heard lots of compliments about the landscaping downtown, since she's
Heather's done a great job.
come on board, and so
Somebody
somebody.
difference on it, 'cause it's so much.
Yeah, so somebody who, knows a lot about this area or the species,
I think if anything,
It's a lot better.
we need to make additions.
It looks
to
beautiful.
the recommended.
I think that's
More than
probably
taking
true.
away from it, I think
Yes.
it's more, making additions of, native stuff and
Sure.
things like that are probably not really there. I mean, we're very flexible about that. When someone calls up and says, hey, I had a really hard time finding this blue spruce that I had shown here, but I can put this in.
Yeah.
We'll take a look at it and say, yeah, that'll work. It seems to work well in this area, et cetera. So, it's there, but if we could promote that even further, that'd be great.
And maybe our goals and policies need to identify that as an area that we continue to look at. And
Yeah.
Well, I'm glad you're showing this picture because, the park that just, I know that they cut back as far as all the amenities on it because of funding, but man, I hope we don't put any ballparks in some of those areas and that we truly do leave that green space because I can't tell you how many people outside of the city are talking about how beautiful that's going. It's beautiful now, but when it matures, how beautiful that whole thing will be.
Yeah.
But you put softball fields right there on that southeast corner.
it was an uphill battle to get it where it is now.
I know.
And to take that out, and I think it's a big step forward.
Oh, I do too. I think it's getting us more attention than any of the other parks that are.
Than anybody expected.
Mhm.
There's a difference between park and open space and recreational facilities. We have not made that
Right.
distinction between the two.
Right.
Right.
We're talking about open space in the land use plan, not recreational
Right.
amenities.
Right.
We got to separate the two, yeah. So,
Yeah, and that little tree part of Randall Tyson is where we used to all, when it's so hot, that's where you go. I mean, 'cause look at that. You play baseball out there, where do you go to get out of the shade?
You go down
You
there.
either go in the restrooms or you go down there where the trees are.
Right.
And the restrooms may be 1,000 degrees because they're brick.
And they may be,
And they have cool
No,
off
it's probably hotter now, there's a lot more asphalt.
So, we've got those major areas identified, you knew that all along. That's something else we need to kind of talk about of,
Yeah, I mean, we gotta set the,
let's not get into opportunity zone stuff tonight.
So here's our upcoming meetings, and,
I just have one other comment to make while everybody said Larry, Dr. Compton's not here. There is some discussion going on about the changes with the governor's emergency declaration gone, whether or not we can actually have people zoom in and those votes be counted. I don't know that we have a final determination, but there's nothing in our ordinance that allows you to not be in attendance to be able to vote. So, encouraging everybody to be at all the meetings that they can from now on, and until we get something further from the city attorney as to what is gonna have to happen. Okay, because we're not really set up, in the past, you had to be in the meeting to be able to vote.
And the engineering groups need to know that too. When there's a decision made, so.
And
but so there's no discussion about making that okay?
Well, I don't know that we have the authority to do that.
I see
yet.
what you're saying.
Who
Gotcha.
has
That-
the authority?
If the city can determine for themselves.
That's the question, is can.
Through ordinance, through bylaws, through something else, can they set that up as a way? Because the question becomes, is the public really involved? When part of the members are doing something from a Zoom standpoint and not in the room. So I don't have all the answers, there's lots of questions.
What do you think, Dale?
Well, I think, I was gonna ask about the accommodations for our meetings from now on. Are they still gonna be the same, or are we moving, or what?
For the month of July, the planning commission will be in the council chamber. As I understand it, and they had a meeting this afternoon to talk about it, I haven't heard whether it changed. The August meeting will be in the new training room of the new police department in the new criminal justice building, which is on the second floor. I don't know
Okay,
if...
tell the truth, did Kevin just make that change because he's not gonna be there in July?
No, they didn't get started moving out when they thought they were going to, so it stayed in the council chamber. And then I don't know if the work session where it will be in July yet, unless something changes today, I don't know.
So July, planning commission will be
In the council room, just like it always has been.
Okay.
The August meeting should be in the new criminal justice building on the second floor.
Okay.
That's what we're being told, right now anyway. They understand we have to know by the middle of the month, because when we publish for public hearings,
Yeah, you got it.
we've got to have the location by then, so they have till the middle of July to make that next decision.
Well, I am sorry, my travel has been bananas. Like, I only travel like Monday through Wednesday, but I'll try and be there.
You have a new iPad
Okay.
that IT has, you just need to make arrangements to pick it up.
Okay, I dropped off my old one today.
Okay, if you want the new one, if you'll just let Debbie know when you can come by the office to pick it up or make arrangements with IT directly, they'll give you the new one.
Okay, perfect,
Okay?
thank you.
And Roy will be presiding over the July 6th meeting.
Yeah.
because I'll be on
Yeah.
vacation.
We'll be on vacation. Okay?
So you guys will get done faster.
I think I'll probably have AT, not military duty in September for 2 weeks out. I think that'll be good for 2 weeks.
Anything else? I know we're hitting with a lot of stuff, but there's a lot of questions, a lot of things to be talked about.
We just need to, I know it's tough, but we've got to continue on the momentum with these work sessions.
Yeah.
And get through it because we're behind.
Yeah, we're behind.
Cool.
You turn off the.
Thanks, Roy. Thank you, Dale.
Thanks, guys.